Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Many Minds Therapy Hub. Today, Rosie and I. Hi, Rosie.
Hey everyone. Hi, Amelka.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we were talking about spending some time in this episode really discussing the complexities of grief and specifically the kind of grief that comes with loving someone that has a terminal illness, right?
Yeah,
Someone that you're watching kind of die slowly in front of
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that was something that was coming up, as a theme with us kind of talking about it. I felt like we felt like it was a really um, important topic to bring up because oftentimes we do spend time talking about grief after the loss of someone we care about or a pet, but oftentimes we really don't slow down and spend time talking about what it's like to anticipate the loss of someone, or like you're saying, watching them slowly um, disappear in front of our eyes. I don't have another word for that right now, and how difficult and challenging that is for the person who is or people that are experiencing that type of grief, as well as the person who's actually with some sort of like terminal illness, or maybe later on stage in life. Sometimes like slip and falls when you're later on in life that actually creates that. Do I heal from this or not? So it's kind of like that anticipation of what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something really specifically hard and unique about, like you said, watching somebody slip away. It's like that anticipatory loss, right? That anticipatory grief where you're already grieving them even though they're still there. And that can be hard to even really kind of find your footing in. Like, how do I savor the time that I have with this person when it's really painful to watch them suffering, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
it's really heavy emotionally to caretake if you're in that role, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've, in my practicing also personally, I've seen that, and that sense of, like you're saying, how do I caretake comes up often. How do I find the strength to, I call it sometimes pretend, because you're still carrying all of these emotions, all of these feelings with you, and you have to hold it together in a way, so that you can take care and maybe create memories, at the same time that you're not sure what's really going to happen or when it's going to happen. But you had mentioned something, Rosie, before that I find really valuable, and is that in grief, we know grief is not linear. And when it comes to anticipatory grief, or like expecting the loss of someone, that one is tough. Can you maybe
Yeah.
say a bit more? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's such a complex issue, right? Like when someone's already gone, they talk about the stages of grief, but those aren't like in order, right? Like it's not like
Mm-hmm.
I'm bargaining and then I'm in anger and then it's like they can bounce back and forth. And I think, and those things can be, those same stages can show up in the anticipatory grief period when you're just trying to come to
Mm-hmm.
grips with the fact that you're losing somebody that you love so much.
Yeah.
And I think you also brought up a really important point, Dr. Emilka, that when you are caretaking, there is often this pressure um, to try not to really let this person that we love so much see how hard it is for us to watch them slip away, how painful
Yeah.
that is. And kind of finding the nuances of like, how do I make peace with this relationship especially if it's like a complex one, like a family member, like a parent, right? Or a
Yeah.
partner. And
Yeah.
I think it's such a nuanced, difficult thing, especially if that person's not really in a place in their own kind of psychological development where they're ready to meet you there and, make peace in the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. That can be a tough one for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that often in, like you say, well, I've seen it in romantic relationships where it can be really challenging if you're going through. I know I've worked with people with like cancer and their partners, and it's really my experience seeing it. Clearly, I haven't lived that, but seeing it, it can be really tough on both ends.
Yeah.
The person who is trying to provide the support, caretaking, trying to like be strong, hold it together, and also maybe heal if there is healing to be done so they can have some closure. And then it's also tough on the person who is actually on that end. From what I've seen, again, I don't want to speak for people that have, gone through that. They're also kind of in a place of, I don't want to put more on you. And oftentimes, then, how we've talked about relationships, that cycle comes up because it's like two people that are trying to protect each other, take care of each other, cannot like meet sometimes where they need to be because they're in protective mode and caretaking mode. One emotionally, the other one emotionally, trying to be maybe physically supportive. So is that can actually really get in the way of where am I in this grieving process? How do I make peace, like you're saying, with what's happening and what's to come if we are both in protective modes? I know you use a lot of parts language. If we're protecting and we're taking care of the other person, that can block some of that healing, or like you're saying, am I psychologically there in a place where we can meet because we have blocks right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it also adds layers of complexity too. If you're have, if you're the person that's dying, like, have you made
Mm-hmm.
peace with your life? And also,
Mm-hmm.
if where it falls in the life cycle, right? If you're younger in
Mm-hmm.
your life, then there's likely going to be a lot of grief around what I haven't gotten to do, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
things in life I'm going to miss out on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very complex, and I know we're not going to do justice in this episode, because it is. I'm thinking now, like, if you're younger and you have children,
Yeah.
how that also kind of adds a layer depending on the age of the children. That adds more on whoever is doing the caretaking. Let's say one partner, and then the other one who may actually have been trying wants to make peace. Maybe a lot of feelings coming around that illness, and then watching the family suffer. um
Yeah.
yeah, it can get really complicated. Yeah.
Yeah. I read this really beautiful book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow.
Hmm.
I think it was, I can't remember who it was by it right now, but one of the things he talks about in the book, I think it was a male writer, but was this concept of rituals for healing, right?
Hmm.
Rituals for releasing grief. And I think that gets to be like such an individual thing, right? But that can be a way to really honor the love that you had for that person once they're
Yeah.
gone, right? Or
Hmm.
even while they're alive, like just a way to kind of channel the emotions that maybe we don't even have enough words to really put to what we're experiencing, but like giving a space to trying to work through that, right? And I think sometimes support
Yeah.
groups can be really phenomenal for that on both ends, right? Having
Yeah.
a space where you can talk about your experience with people that understand it. And sometimes that's, our what are whatever our family or we whatever our practices are for funeral rites or a
Yeah.
wake or celebration of life, right? Those are
Mm-hmm.
part of it. But
Right.
yeah,
Are you saying then also, while we're going through this anticipatory grief process, which is very complex, maybe also, and I've known of people that have actually included the person with the illness in the process of, how would you want us to remember you?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's Francis Weller. I just wanted to look
Mm-hmm.
the name of the author. It also leads, um, well, actually, I don't, Francis could be a male name or I don't know their gender identity, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I, they lead uh also rituals where you like go
Mm-hmm.
and they have, like sacred things that they kind of do to help people release, like in this
The
space.
emotional.
Yeah, right. And like
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's, fire to like honor the anger, right? And you might
Mm-hmm.
writing,
Mm-hmm.
really like releasing all of that anger and burning it or
Mm-hmm.
screaming for the fire or like I know the book also talked about like water as like a, a symbol to honor like the sadness and kind of sometimes
Mm-hmm.
having a space where other people are just like weeping openly or like
Mm-hmm.
screaming kind of gives you the permission, like that is another option that might also be really healing both for the person that is with the terminal illness and the person that is in that anticipatory grief process, just having a
Yeah.
space to kind of be out of the box and release some of the emotions in their bodies that
Yeah.
maybe
And
not have.
and being okay. I hear what I hear is being okay with the process. So it's a space where you can accept what it is
Yeah,
and and let your emotions out in, it sounds like, in a safe way
yeah,
without having to hold up or hold on to, I need to be strong through the process, or I need to hold it together, whichever words people may use sometimes.
yeah, giving you a
Actually,
space.
mm-hmm.
Sorry, yeah, just that you can release those emotions without having to censor to
Mm-hmm.
try to protect the other person, like you said.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I know there are a lot of models around like kind of conceptualizing grief.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know that we necessarily need to go into those so much, but I think
No. Mm-hmm.
maybe even just touching on the stages of grief of like, what are those even? Because I have those like in the back of my mind, but do I have them
Yeah,
necessarily memorized? Not so much, but
right. Well, yeah, I mean, we can name those, and I think most importantly is to mention, like we say initially, it's not linear. And
right.
when it comes to anticipatory grief, the challenge oftentimes with caregivers and also the person who's ill is the back and forth between hopelessness and helplessness, and then trying to find faith in the process and seeing a glimpse of hope, and
Yeah.
how that actually gets in the way of, do I actually grieve, and what do I allow myself to grieve, or I see that maybe there is a chance that things will go well and I don't have to sit in or dwell in these emotions. And then suddenly you're like lifting yourself up, and again, you're dropped, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you get a different news, today things may be going well, but then in a week you get news that are not necessarily aligned with how you felt, so now you lose that hope. And that's the challenge that goes with even just naming the stages of, you know um grief, that you really can't even get there sometimes in
Yeah.
whichever order it is.
Yeah. It makes me think of like the concept of ambiguous loss of, right? Like
Yes.
it's
Mm-hmm.
this person may be terminal, but sometimes you can have a terminal illness and it turns around
And
miraculously,
recover.
survive.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can have a terminal illness and that means, you're alive for a week. And sometimes that's like 10 years, right? So
Right.
there's so much ambiguity and like, what is this process even going to look like? And
Right.
how,
The uncertainty.
right, totally. I just wanted to name those stages of
Yeah.
grief by Kubler-Ross, but um denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I like we've talked about, sometimes those can overlap, or like it's definitely not a linear process. And
Yeah.
I've also heard of like a sixth stage of meaning making, right? Like, how do I make sense of this loss? Who am I moving forward? How do I want to honor that person in my life?
Mm-hmm.
What qualities did they represent to me that I want to take on and try to hold in the world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people actually include those and make them rituals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of part of what I was saying. Sometimes people also, as a way to hold each other and honor each other, I mean, hold each other as in love, um, they kind of come up with, this is how I want to be remembered. This is what I want moving forward. And the other person may want to honor that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely, I think, something that can be so hard and so messy.
Mm-hmm.
I just, would encourage people to try to give themselves and the
Mm-hmm.
people, whether and the people around them as much grace as possible, as much compassion as possible, because
Yeah.
it doesn't always, grief can be really messy and it doesn't always bring
Yeah.
out the best in us.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, because right now we're talking about how do we hold each other? How do we take care of each other? Or like what happens when people are actually trying to be there for each other? But the truth is that oftentimes we burned out
Yeah.
because it's a lot.
Yeah.
And we may not necessarily find the best way to like you're saying, let out the emotions without filter,
Mhm.
or we often don't know how to just sit with and come up with a ritual, or how do I even sit with my person or my loved one who I may actually at any moment lose. And I'm also feeling like I can't handle this because it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that can get messy because it's a lot of feelings that, we're humans.
Yeah. And if you're
Yeah.
trying to hold it all together and there's nowhere for you to process your difficult emotions, then it can,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes those protective parts of us can get a little mean, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that doesn't look so graceful.
Right.
Sometimes it comes out sideways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when you said, give people grace or be kind to each other, sometimes we may not necessarily see it with the person who's ill. It may come up with like another family member or friends, and that's also a block to kind of sit with your own feelings, because now you don't have a safe space, because you're irritable because you're tired, you have lack of sleep, you're overwhelmed with arrangements, maybe appointments, X, Y, and Z, holding a job because you don't want to lose it. That's quite a lot.
Yeah.
And then you snapped at your ex, somebody like sister, brother, mother, whoever it is. They may not necessarily get it.
Yeah.
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 Or maybe they are also in their own emotions going through it, and then that's not necessarily understood.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can definitely, I think, when you think about grief in a family, like if a family is losing someone to a terminal illness, then that can really like heighten a lot of the maladaptive family patterns, right? That
Yeah. Yeah.
and having a safe container to kind of process that and make peace with even, where your family might be at and its development, like what side of themselves people are showing in your family. I think whether that's, like I said, like a support group or therapy or safe friends that are kind of outside,
Yeah.
you deserve a space to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. 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 I think this is really important to really bring that, especially my sense, and again, this is my individual sense coming from or living, I have lived in different cultures. It's like grief is not something that we necessarily talk too much about in this culture. I'm talking about US, my
You know,
experience.
white
I could be
American,
wrong.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And because of that thing, I think a lot of this gets lost and could easily sometimes, or not so easy, but it could be easier, is that the word, handled if people kind of just openly spoke about, okay, let's coordinate. I know you're going through a lot, how do we support each other? Um, even if the family dynamics were not the best, if it were something that we openly kind of communicate about, that may actually ease some of the tensions while we're taking care of someone who is in high need of us.
Yeah.
I don't, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's so much complexity to it and the ways that
Mm-hmm.
grief can, I think, affect a family and also sometimes the suppression of grief, right? Like
Yeah.
my parents' first daughter, they lost, she was 18 months old, and they ran really hard from that because they didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it definitely affected my family's ability to kind of really be in emotions. And
Yeah.
I think that those kinds of things, right? Like if you're, and I've seen kind of similar things in my personal and professional life too, where if you're in a family that's just trying to like hold it together for the kids, sometimes the kids need to see like it's okay to cry about this. It's okay to talk
Yeah.
about this. And it's normal to feel sad, right? Kind of normalizing and validating
Or
what
anger, right?
yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I feel
Yeah.
like we could spend several episodes talking about grief. It's such a
Yeah. Yeah.
complex.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I'm also trying to be very mindful of, like, certain things may show up in one family, or, with however that family may look, and some other things may not necessarily show up. Everyone has a very, different uh, dynamic in their own little world, in
Yeah,
this huge world.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I know for us, I mean, culturally, I'm speaking about my own culture, since I brought up culture a bit. We speak a lot about grief and dying, and we do a lot of rituals when, while people are still alive, but also, after their passing. And that really helps. That
mm,
really helps.
yeah,
Because now you're like openly talking about the inevitable, right?
yeah. Does that feel like that's kind of Cuban culture in the like on a meta level, like or more kind of specific to your family culture?
That's actually a good point. I would say, I don't want to speak for the whole island, because, again, that would be um, unfair. But I would say my experience at a large in the island is that we do talk about grief and loss, and we do have a lot of like just rituals that are part of our lives, and that really helps. um, Even when families are not doing well,
Yeah.
people still kind of pull each other in, and okay, let's really work on this. We got to take care of um, whoever is in need. I mean, I've had personally a few people die from terminal illnesses, and I would say my family is not perfect by no means. And I've seen people just come through and really get organized. And how do we take care of this person? Um, and really, that in itself has been somewhat healing. Clearly, I don't know what happens with everyone's relationships, but I've witnessed that with my neighbors back in Cuba. I've witnessed that with like other people in the communities.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say the whole island is like that, because that would be unfair. Just like I don't want to say the whole U.S. culture doesn't talk about it, because we do. Here we are talking about it. Um, but I've seen that, you know, I've seen that here with couples when I've done like couples retreats. I did couple retreats or helped for couples whose one spouse was going through cancer. And that was very powerful. That was very powerful. Like you're saying, group helps, just the idea of putting things out there and see how do we cope through this? How do we heal? How do we support each other? Um, who do we pull in?
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of the time, the individualism of America makes
Mm-hmm.
it, can give people kind of this notion that we're supposed to figure it out alone when
Mm-hmm.
that's not, how we're designed. We're relational
Right.
beings and we need community and we need, you know, support. We can't carry it all alone. And I
Yes, it's a lot.
just this kind of idea that if you're not bootstrapping well enough, if you're not pulling
Mm-hmm.
yourself up well enough, handling this well enough,
Mm-hmm.
so it's an individual problem, I think is an unfortunate, and I don't know, I just think that that kind of messaging really serves to isolate and shame people when
Right.
your feelings make sense and
Yeah. Yeah. Or
you
feeling like they're a burden, so they don't want to try to even reach out. Right.
right.
And even when people are like kind of offering support, oh no, I don't want to be a burden, because what would that say about me right now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes it really tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I definitely, I think finding community that
yeah.
loves and accepts you, right, can be hard when there is kind of this natural
Mm-hmm.
like isolation that can happen
Mm-hmm.
around individualism. But I think that that's especially important when you're facing something like grief, especially if you're caretaking. Like, there's just,
Yeah, yeah.
which, there's definitely some logistical struggles with that, because if you're caretaking, then you might not have the time and space and resources to be able to access that
Right.
easily.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think you've put it, in a beautiful way, is the way the system has already kind of like been is built like that.
Yeah.
um, we've kind of come up with this belief system that we have to do it all together, and people are carrying daily life like this, that whenever something of this magnitude comes up, now we don't know how to shift.
Yeah. Yeah. I think COVID made it really clear to a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people in America how much we really need people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that everybody, I think a lot of people, myself included, haven't fully gotten back to that level of like community and social connection that we
Mm-hmm.
were kind of pre-COVID. And
Yeah,
that can definitely be another kind of hurdle, right?
yeah. An added layer to how do we manage.
Yeah. How do we find
Yeah.
that community, especially when we've
Mm-hmm.
internalized messages, like you were saying, that maybe we're a burden if we can't handle it all on our own.
Mm-hmm.
Grief is a lot, especially when you're caretaking, especially when you're watching somebody that you love dearly suffering
Mm-hmm.
and in pain and, kind of slipping away, becoming
Yeah.
less themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. But I think if we were to leave a message out of this very short episode about grief, is people to reach out.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is always someone um, that will kind of sit with you and hear you out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's normal to need that. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
You're not doing
And
it wrong.
sometimes, yeah. And sometimes we feel like there is nobody. I just want to acknowledge that. Uh, but there is always someone out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if finding friends at this stage
Mm-hmm.
of life is a challenge, then find a therapist you can lean on that you
Mm-hmm.
trust, a
Mm-hmm.
support group, or with people that are
Mm-hmm.
grieving or dying and grieving their own
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Such a heavy topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's also one of the things that the Wild Edge of Sorrow talks about is just this concept that the more that we allow ourselves to really like love and with our whole hearts, the more that we
Mm-hmm.
allow ourselves to grieve. And that I think sometimes that's like a barrier, right? People will kind of hold back
Mm-hmm.
from really letting their whole hearts be invested. But I think there is something really also beautiful about the grief, because it is like a way of really like still honoring that love, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it's bringing emotion up for me right now, but I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like that's still, I think when I notice grief isn't something like you grieve for X number of days or months or whatever, and then you're done. It's like that's how you continue to have a relationship with that
With.
person, that
Mm.
pet,
Yeah. Yeah.
your whole, forever. And you
Yeah.
have a relationship with grief too, that I think
Mm-hmm.
like just it is also a way of like continuing to honor that love.
Yeah. 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 I think what's coming up for me as you're saying that is like, I think you mentioned something beautiful with water, like even using water. I think it was in that book that you mentioned. And I know that's the way that I honor my grandpa. Yeah. Like I have a glass of water for him. And that's the way that we have a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even after he died.
Yeah, for sure. I think those little ways of like honoring
Mm-hmm.
too, right? Of like this symbolizes that person that I still care about,
Mm-hmm.
love so much. And I think,
Yeah.
like I've definitely heard of people having a ritual of like celebrating that person's birthday, or like
Mm-hmm.
having a part of their house or their room, a shelf or whatever that has pictures of that person or the
Mm-hmm.
pet or whatever, right? That like
Mm-hmm.
gives you a space to really think about and honor that love.
Yeah. Yeah. And be in relationship. And I also like that you said is because this comes up sometimes too. How long will I feel
Yeah.
this loss? How long will I feel like this? You know, that's like I never have an answer for that because
Yeah.
it's very individual. Yeah. And you may choose not to ever let go of that. But
Yeah.
you can make it a beautiful thing, like you said,
Yeah. And you're not doing it wrong. If you
Mm-hmm.
if you never stop grieving that person, right? I think that that's
Mm-hmm.
honoring the emotions that come up and the timeline, right? Like it's okay if that's always like a little seed that you carry. Sometimes that is like how you honor that love, right?
Yeah.
Grieving it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that the episode about grief is the one that makes me
Makes you cry.
teary. Yeah, but
It
okay.
is a heavy one. It is a heavy one, especially when, you know, you talk about something that has touched
All of
you
us.
or many of us, a lot of us.
Yeah. I think most people have had some form of significant grief by the time they're an adult, right? But
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
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 Okay. Thank you, Rosie.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Yamoka.
Thanks, everyone. And I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Yeah. And we'll keep talking. We'll come back to it at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
A juicy topic. Lots to talk about around grief. For sure.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.